The National Association of Corporate Directors, Silicon Valley Chapter, presents
I'm Lon Allen, Chairman of the Silicon Valley NACD, and we're here today to discuss the audacious and massive fraud masterminded by Bernie Madoff. To address these issues, we are fortunate to have as our guest Nancy Fineman, a senior partner with the respected firm of Cotchett, Pitre, and McCarthy, which firm has been involved in a lot of the litigation against Bernie Madoff and his enablers. Nancy, could you give us a sense of the scope of the Madoff fraud in terms of numbers of people injured, billions of dollars stolen, and the number of years this fraud went on?
I can do my best. I think it was about 1 year ago from today that the world learned that Bernie Madoff was a complete fraud. The numbers have ranged to the $60 billion range, but I think how I look at it is for every victim of the fraud, and there are probably about 4,000 of them, they lost, whether it was $100 or $1 million or millions of dollars, they lost money that they counted on for their life savings, their retirement, to fund a charity or something like that. So I look at it not just as a huge number, which is so big that I've never seen money that large, but the individual impact that it had on thousands of people.
I think Bernie Madoff is now in his early 70s. Do we have a sense of how many years he had been cheating his investors?
I think everybody has a different thought about that. My law partner, Joe Cotchett, and I were the first lawyers to meet with Bernie Madoff, besides his own lawyers. We met with him in the Butner, North Carolina prison, and we asked him that question, and what he told us was it was the early 90s that he started. The SEC and others think that he really went back much longer than that, but what Bernie Madoff told us was that something happened in about the 1990s.
From speaking with him, interviewing him, what's your sense of why a respected and very wealthy, honest investment advisor became a crook?
Well, I'm not sure that he was honest from the beginning. I think he shaded a little bit. But what he told us, and I've been doing financial fraud for over 20 years, and it's a pretty typical pattern. He said one day things went a little bit bad, and so rather than disclose it, he took money. He was in a Ponzi scheme where you kind of take money from one person, give it to the other. He started doing that. The next day, he still didn't have the money, and he kept thinking that he'd pay the money back. To me, what motivates people like that is pure and simple greed. They don't want to get caught. They have a fancy lifestyle that they enjoy, and their ego is so big that they think that they'll never get caught. In Bernie's case, I think he saw the handwriting on the wall because everything started crashing down, and I truly think that he thought if he confessed, everybody would believe it was only him, which I don't think anybody believes, and I think he thought he'd get a very light prison sentence. Instead, he got sentenced to life.
Personally, I have trouble understanding whether it's 65 billion or 45 billion, where did all that money go that he took from investors?
Well, a lot of it went to finance his lifestyle, the yachts, the nice houses. You can see them on the internet. They financed the nice lifestyle of his brother with his fancy cars and his sons, and they also financed the lifestyle of his enablers. And then, of course, a lot of the money that was investments was used to pay the past investors. That's what the receiver, Irving Picard, is alleging, and not giving a lot of the money back to the victims is the early people made a lot of money from new investors' money.
So that the early investors didn't really earn a return, they just got the investments of the current investors, right?
Well, the way I look at it is the long-term investors invested money that they could have invested elsewhere. And so they should have and shown on paper that they did earn money. But as everybody who knows about Madoff knows, he never made those investments. There were phantom profits, and he was able to do that by using new investors' money. But they're real losses to the people, even to the older investors, because they could have done something else with their money.
It's hard to imagine, even with lifestyles, that a group of people could spend $40 billion. Do you think there's still money secreted that the trustee hasn't found?
Well, I think the trustee's done a very good job at looking for the money, and he's found a lot. But you have to remember how Bernie Madoff operated. There were a number of investors that went straight to him, but most of them went through feeders, either the large feeder funds like the ones we're suing, Tremont and Beacon, some of the other feeder funds, and then individuals who earned quite a bit, like the Stanley Chases of the world, and each of them sucked out money too from this. So the 60 billion or the 40 billion or the 20 billion, there were a lot of mouths to feed to keep this fraud successful.
As of this date, are the feeder funds and the enablers, as you and I have both referred to them, are they still protesting their innocence, or have any of them confessed to understanding that what Madoff was doing was fraudulent?
Well, there have been 2 guilty pleas. The little accountant who audited the books, and Frank DePasquale, the kind of chief lieutenant at Madoff, have both pled guilty. And it's kind of ironic that about 2 weeks after Bernie Madoff told us that he did it all alone, that Frank DePasquale turned that lie right on it, turned that statement right on its face, because Frank DePasquale pled guilty. But all of the feeder funds have all said no, they didn't know, that they were defrauded just like everybody else. And it's my opinion that they had to have known. There's just too much that raised red flags for something like a Tremont or a Beacon, where when they say they're going to go do diligence and they see a small auditor auditing the books where they don't understand where the physical custody of the assets are, that there are enough red flags that these feeder funds should have known.
How could Madoff, whether this was a 10-year fraud, a 20-year fraud, or a longer fraud, how could he survive all those years without, and we understand that there were several times that the SEC looked into it, and each time, for whatever reason, they didn't catch the fraud. What are your views on that?
Well, there are 2 ways to look at it. One is that somebody got paid off, and there's a connection between the SEC and SEC lawyer and Shana Madoff, the daughter of Peter Madoff, Bernie Madoff's brother. The SEC's done an investigation and says, no, there's no payoff there. The next reason, which I think the SEC acknowledges, is that people just weren't doing their job. What Bernie Madoff likes to think is that his mystique and his reputation got him far, and I think that's somewhat true, that you went in, you saw what was supposed to be a successful enterprise, and you don't ask the tough questions. Bernie Madoff told us about an incident in, I believe it was May of 2006, where he was called down to SEC headquarters. There was a group of people. He said one had like enforcement team in those jackets like you think you go out for a drug bust, and they questioned him, and they asked him where the assets were who had physical control, and he said the Deposit Trust Corporation. They wrote it down. So Friday afternoon, he thought that that Monday his whole operation would be exposed, but as became clear, nobody from the SEC checked. And why that was is maybe they're just underfunded, maybe they just thought, well, we heard the answer, it's got to be true, but everybody kind of failed by not asking the tough questions.
So the investors all thought there was an independent custodian of the assets, but in fact there was not?
There was never any trades. For at least 20 years, there were no trades. There were monthly statements that were given to investors or given to the feeder funds, and no stock was purchased at all.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I think we're going to stop here. Fortunately, you've agreed to give us another podcast where we're going to talk about how we as investors could avoid being victimized by a Bernie Madoff in a financial fraud or by someone in a real estate fraud or some other fraud. And so we'll get back to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.